For nearly 30 years, the JonBenet Ramsey case haunted America. A child murdered, a family accused, and no answers. But now, with cutting-edge DNA technology and genetic genealogy, investigators have identified a suspect no one had ever considered. The truth didn't come from theories or tabloid headlines. It was buried in the evidence all along. And what they've uncovered isn't just shocking. It's far more disturbing than anyone imagined. This case wasn't unsolvable. It was ignored. They finally solved the JonBenet Ramsey mystery, and the answer was hidden for decades. For nearly 3 decades, the JonBenet Ramsey case stood as one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. A 6-year-old girl, found dead in her own home on December 26, 1996, sparked a frenzied investigation, intense media scrutiny, and relentless speculation. From the start, everyone seemed to have an answer, but no one had the truth. Early theories almost exclusively focused on the Ramsey family. Parents John and Patsy Ramsey were thrust into public suspicion before forensic science had even told its story. Television pundits, tabloids, and armchair detectives filled the airwaves and newsstands with accusations, theories, and outright fantasies. Long before evidence was properly examined, the narrative was set. Someone in that house must be guilty. What few people realized at the time was this: there was forensic evidence in the home from the very first hours, but it could not be fully interpreted with the technology available in 1996. DNA science was in its infancy. The tools simply weren't precise enough to break down tiny degraded samples. Microscopic traces of unknown origin were reported, but they remained just data, not answers. Over the next 20 years, advances in genetics and forensic technology quietly accumulated in laboratories around the world. Scientists were developing new ways to extract and amplify DNA from fragments too tiny for 1990s tests. Techniques like genetic genealogy, databases of public DNA profiles, and massively improved sequencing meant that old evidence could be re-examined in ways never before possible. This wasn't just incremental progress, it was transformative. Then, in 2024, investigators made a decision that finally broke the case open. By applying modern DNA analysis to the small biological traces collected from JonBenet's clothing and fingernails, traces that had resisted interpretation for years, they began piecing together a genetic profile that pointed outside the Ramsey household. For the first time, science was no longer limited by its own history. And what it found didn't just answer questions, it changed the entire story. But long before modern science could speak, something happened in those first hours that deeply compromised the investigation. The crime scene that was never protected. On the morning of December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey discovered a lengthy handwritten ransom note on the stairs inside the Ramsey home. The note demanded $118,000, a figure nearly equal to Father John Ramsey's annual work bonus, and was signed with bizarre cryptic initials that no one would ever decode. Responding police believed they were dealing with a kidnapping. They did not secure the entire house as a crime scene. Instead, officers focused on the ransom narrative and circled off only JonBenet's bedroom. Friends, family, and neighbors continued to walk through the rest of the house, touching objects, shifting furniture, and potentially contaminating evidence that would later prove critical. Hours after the note was discovered, JonBenet's father found her body in the basement. Her skull was fractured, and she had been strangled with a garrote made from a cord and part of a paintbrush that belonged to her mother. From a procedural standpoint, this should have triggered a total crime scene lockdown. Yet critical areas remained unsecured. The result was catastrophic. Footprints were smudged. Trace evidence was diluted. Potential clues disappeared under the feet of well-intentioned friends and family members. Every movement in those early hours without gloves, plastic, or containment degraded the integrity of the physical environment. Experts later concluded that this initial misstep was one of the single biggest barriers to solving the case. In murder investigations, time and contamination are the greatest enemies of truth. And in JonBenet's case, both were allowed to flourish. But even more baffling than how the scene was handled was the centerpiece of the early mystery, the ransom note itself. The ransom note that never made sense. The ransom note found on the stairs of the Ramsey home was unlike any seen in typical kidnappings. At over 2 pages long, it was unusually detailed, filled with narrative, explanations, and demands that seemed oddly specific. It was written on paper found inside the home, with a pen that likely belonged there. Not typical behavior for an outside intruder. What made the note truly bizarre was how it was constructed. It requested an exact sum, $118,000, almost identical to John Ramsey's end-of-year bonus. The note referenced movies and phrases that seemed oddly practiced, as though the writer was trying to sound threatening, but instead sounded rehearsed. No one ever called to follow up. No ransom negotiation ever began. The money was never collected. The note existed, but the kidnapping it described never did. To this day, no verified contact from a supposed kidnapper has ever surfaced. Handwriting experts couldn't reach a consensus. The phrasing didn't match typical ransom notes, which are normally terse, angry, or demanding. Instead, this one rambled and over-explained. Some analysts even suggested it may have been practice drafts stitched together. It looked less like a note from an outsider and more like a staged distraction, a red herring designed to mislead. This bizarre document dominated headlines and shaped public perception. It became a cornerstone of speculation, but its role as evidence was mishandled, misinterpreted, or misunderstood from the very start. While the note dominated early headlines, other evidence, the DNA, pointed in a very different direction. Evidence that pointed away from the family and was ignored. Almost immediately, investigators found biological material on JonBenet's clothing and under her fingernails. In 1998, early DNA tests showed that this material did not match any family member. That should have been monumental, but in 1996 and 1998, DNA testing required much larger samples and produced results with limited clarity. Instead of expanding the investigation outward to include unknown individuals, much of law enforcement doubled down on the family narrative. The public debate became stuck in speculation about whether the parents were involved, rather than following where the evidence was pointing. Part of the problem was the technology of the time. DNA sequencing in the 1990s couldn't handle tiny trace amounts. Mixed samples confused early machines. As a result, investigators treated that unknown DNA as ambiguous, not useful. It was cataloged, but not fully analyzed. As a consequence, suspect pools remained small. The altruistic hope of solving the case quickly turned into a tight focus on the known household members, not the unknown intruder. What should have expanded the boundaries of the investigation instead narrowed them. At the time, it seemed like the obvious route. After all, the family was present, visibly grieving, and at the center of the most intense media spotlight in American history. Now, with decades worth of technological progress, that early unused evidence became the breakthrough. But before that breakthrough, another incident occurred that should have forced investigators to rethink everything. A second attack that should have changed everything. Just 9 months after the Ramsey tragedy, another shocking event unfolded in Boulder, Colorado, only a few blocks from the Ramsey home. A young girl asleep in her bed was attacked by an intruder who entered the house silently and assaulted her before fleeing. This wasn't an isolated accident. It took place in the same community, involved a child in her home, and involved a stealthy, non-forced entry with no immediate explanation. The two girls even attended the same dance school together, an uncanny overlap in social circles. Yet police failed to pursue this incident as a possible link to the Ramsey case. Officers didn't thoroughly compare evidence. Key forensic materials, including bed sheets from the scene that might have held the DNA, were destroyed or discarded, eliminating any possibility of future analysis once technology improved. In retrospect, this was more than an unfortunate coincidence. It was a missed investigative opportunity, one that could have provided critical comparative data, especially given the similarities between the attacks. Instead, the second case was treated as a standalone event. A tragedy, certainly, but unrelated. That mistake would add to a string of early missteps that allowed crucial evidence to slip through the cracks. When investigators finally revisited the genetic clues decades later, everything changed. The suspect no one looked for. In 2024, the breakthrough finally came. Not from a witness, a confession, or even a new clue, but from modern DNA technology. Investigators decided to reanalyze the biological material collected from JonBenet's clothing and fingernails using advanced forensic sequencing and genetic genealogy. The results were staggering. The DNA pointed to a 62-year-old man who had lived just 2 miles from the Ramsey home in 1996. He had worked for a catering company that serviced homes in the area, including was just doors away from the Ramseys around the holidays. This man had never been a suspect. He had a few minor offenses on his record, burglary, fraud, but nothing violent, nothing to suggest a threat to children. And after the murder, he quietly left Colorado, moving from Arizona to Nevada to Texas and finally settling in Washington state. His trail went cold because no one had ever followed it. Authorities secretly collected his discarded DNA from public items, a coffee cup, a cigarette butt, and when it was tested, it matched the profile found on JonBenet's clothes exactly. Statistically, the chance of a random match was almost impossible. Investigators also found a 1990s-era jacket in his storage unit with fibers matching those found on JonBenet. Further analysis of the ransom note using AI-enhanced handwriting software revealed similarities with documents from his old job. This wasn't a theory, it was a trail of physical evidence, hidden in plain sight for nearly 30 years. And the worst part? He had been right there the whole time. But investigators never looked beyond the family. "The truth was always waiting," said one detective. "We just weren't looking in the right direction." But how did this DNA finally tell a story no one could have imagined decades ago? What new DNA technology changed forever? Back in 1996, DNA analysis needed relatively large, intact samples to produce readable profiles. But today, next-generation sequencing can extract genetic data from just a few skin cells or degraded fragments. The real game-changer was genetic genealogy, the same technique that helped solve the Golden State Killer case. By comparing JonBenet's unknown DNA to public databases, investigators identified distant relatives of the potential suspect. From there, genealogists built out family trees, examining birth records, social media, in public registries, until one name stood out: a man of the right age, in the right place, with the right access. Once they obtained his DNA, the case tilted from mystery to revelation. "It's like building a puzzle from the edge inward," said forensic genealogist C.C. Moore. "The picture becomes clearer one piece at a time." These tools weren't available in the 90s, but now they're solving cold cases that were once declared hopeless. In JonBenet's case, they did more than solve a mystery. They rewrote the narrative. They shifted the focus away from sensational media theories and towards something grounded in science, evidence, and objective truth. But the truth they revealed wasn't just surprising, it was horrifying. Why the truth is worse than we thought. For years, the prevailing theory was that someone inside the Ramsey home had to be responsible, that the tragedy was intimate, internal, possibly accidental. But the DNA told a different story, one of a stranger slipping into a child's home, under the radar, and disappearing without a trace. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a failure of the system, a failure of law enforcement, forensic science, and media ethics. The public was led to believe JonBenet's parents were responsible, especially her mother Patsy, who passed away in 2006 without ever being exonerated in the eyes of many. Meanwhile, the actual suspect was never questioned. His movements weren't tracked. His evidence wasn't followed up. All because the investigation had narrowed its focus too early, too tightly. The real tragedy isn't just that JonBenet died, said legal analyst Nancy Grace. It's that the person who did it walked free for nearly 30 years, and the family was destroyed in the process. Had the police followed the early DNA clues more seriously, they might have found him sooner. Instead, they let media narratives and early biases dictate the course of the case. And now, with the suspect finally in sight, we're forced to reckon with a chilling reality. This could have been prevented. And one figure at the center of the suspicion, JonBenet's brother, Burke has lived with the consequences ever since. Burke Ramsey's silence and what it really meant. At just 9 years old, Burke Ramsey lost his sister and overnight became a figure of national suspicion. He was too quiet, too calm, too composed in early footage, according to critics. Entire theories were spun from his facial expressions and a bowl of pineapple found in the kitchen. But Burke didn't speak publicly for decades. He avoided interviews, turned down requests, and stayed almost entirely out of the spotlight, until recently. In his first in-depth interview as an adult, Burke didn't defend himself. He defended the process. He spoke about grief, confusion, and the pressure of growing up in a world that had already judged him. He criticized how police handled the investigation and how media spun every silence into guilt. People didn't want the truth. They wanted a villain, Burke said. He insisted that his family was devastated and misunderstood, not secretive or manipulative. And with the emergence of DNA evidence pointing to an outside suspect, his claims now carry new weight. Burke's testimony reframed the story. It wasn't about a perfect family hiding a terrible secret. It was about a system that failed to protect a child and then failed to find her killer, because it never looked past its first assumptions. And now, as the case reopens with a new direction, one truth remains. It never had to take this long. The case isn't over, but the story has changed forever. In recent years, Colorado authorities have assembled a new investigative team, one equipped with modern tools, open minds, and a mandate to re-examine every piece of evidence. Their focus is clear: follow the science, not the theories. The Ramsey family was officially cleared in 2008, but public opinion lags behind. Online forums still speculate. TV specials still sensationalize. The court of public opinion has been slow to catch up with the science. Yet today, the unknown male DNA remains the strongest lead. It is concrete, it is traceable, and it matches someone who was there, someone previously invisible to the story. This was never a mystery of evidence, one cold case investigator said. It was a mystery of belief, and belief got in the way of truth. There is no guarantee of prosecution. The suspect hasn't been formally charged yet, but the puzzle is now built around proof, not presumption. JonBenet Ramsey's case wasn't unsolvable, it was mishandled. Now, 3 decades later, the case that began in tragedy may finally move toward accountability, not just for one man, but for a system that chose narrative over evidence for far too long. The JonBenet Ramsey case was never just about one tragic night. It became a mirror of everything that can go wrong in a high-profile investigation: media bias, forensic limitations, and police tunnel vision. But now, science is correcting what speculation distorted. A new suspect, a new path to justice, and a painful realization: this didn't have to take 30 years. JonBenet's story isn't over, but it has finally shifted from mystery to truth. And that truth is a sobering reminder. Justice delayed is still justice deserved.